Good evening and welcome back to ChessMess. Grab yourself a nice cup of tea and relax because I'm going to go through with you some background on the players that are going to be playing in the match that Paul Morphy is going to be annotating. So we need to know some of this background information so that the games and the annotations make sense. So the first player is Louis-Charles Mahé de la Bourdonnais, and he was born on the island of La Réunion in the Indian Ocean in 1795. And here is a picture of him. You need to remember that at this time it was the dawn of photography, and photography was not widely available, so most of the people involved are going to be having drawings or paintings made of them. So this is a nice drawing of Le Bourdonnais, and you also have to remember at around 1795 this was the tail end of the French Revolution where bad things were happening in France, as you can see from this drawing. He was the grandson of Bertrand François Mahé de la Bourdonnais, and I have a picture of his grandfather. So as you can imagine, if you were around at this time in France and you were a member of the French aristocracy, like this man was, you probably wouldn't have a very, very happy time. So it was good for Le Bourdonnais, the grandson, that he was on an island in the Indian Ocean and not in Europe. So he learned chess in 1814. The next year was when Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo and Europe became a bit calmer. So in 1815, Le Bourdonnais, at the age of 18, he left the island and went to Paris. Sadly, he squandered his fortune on ill-advised land deals. But he began to take chess seriously in 1818, regularly playing at the Café de la Région. He took lessons from Jacques-François Mahé, his first teacher, and within 2 years he became one of the best players of the café. He was now able to earn his living as a professional chess player. He played in an era before a World Chess Championship was established, but was considered to be perhaps the strongest player in the world from 1821, when he became able to beat his chess teacher Alexandre de Chapelle. And I do have a picture of de Chapelle. Here he is. In 1823, Le Bourdonnais defeated William Lewis, Britain's leading player, in a match in London. And here's a drawing of Mr. William Lewis. And in the spring of 1825, he played and defeated the best players that England had to offer. 9 years later, he returned to London when a challenge was issued on Alexander McDonnell's behalf. So that concludes Le Bourdonnais' introduction, and we're going on to McDonnell's now. So, the son of a surgeon, Alexander McDonnell was born in Belfast in 1798. He was trained as a merchant and worked for some time in the West Indies. In 1820 he settled in London, where he became the secretary of the Committee of West Indian Merchants, in which role he advocated strongly on behalf of slave-owning sugar plantation owners. It was a lucrative post that made him a wealthy man and left him with plenty of time to indulge his passion for chess. So, this picture is all around the internet, and and a lot of people claim that this is Alexander McDonnell. But in fact it's not. This is a chess writer called George McDonnell, who was more active in the latter end of the 19th century, whereas Alexander McDonnell, the player we are talking about, was active towards the beginning of the 19th century. I'm sorry. So I haven't been able to find any picture of the real Alexander McDonnell. So we're just going to have to make do with another famous Irishman substituting in for him. Here we go. That looks great. I like this. This is good. So we'll carry on. In 1825 he became a pupil of William Lewis, who was then the leading player in Britain. And this is the same William Lewis that we mentioned earlier that was beaten by Le Bourdonnais, this fellow. Soon McDonnell had become so good that Lewis, fearing for his reputation, simply refused to play him anymore. Around 1825-1826, McDonnell played Captain Evans, while the latter was on shore leave in London. McDonnell was beaten with what is now regarded in chess circles as the creation of the Evans Gambit. Here is Captain Evans. I think that's a very detailed drawing. I don't think it's a photo. I think photos exist of this gentleman, but I like this picture, so I'm using it. In 1831, along with George Walker, he became a founding member of the Westminster Chess Club and was acclaimed as England's best player. This is a picture of George Walker from 1876, so much later on. He's around 40 years older here. But yeah, nice picture again. And that concludes the introduction for McDonnell. So about the matches themselves, the 1834 matches. These matches are sometimes seen as having been unofficial World Chess Championship matches before the title of World Chess Champion was created in 1886. It was the first match of importance in the history of chess and is sometimes referred to today as the World Championship of 1834. The games were published widely and were annotated and discussed by enthusiasts all over Europe. In the course of the mammoth encounter, both players introduced several new innovations, a few of which are still seen today. McDonnell, for instance, introduced the McDonnell Gambit variation of the already popular King's Gambit. The matches began in June 1834 and were played at the Westminster Club in London. Play generally began around noon until 6 or 7 p.m, but never more than one game at a sitting. Many games were adjourned till next day and they didn't play on Sundays. Bourdonnais knew no English and McDonnell knew no French. It is said that the only word they exchanged during their historic encounter was check. The conditions of play were very loose, there were no seconds, there was no time limit, the stakes were very small, and amazing to relate, the whole splendid series would never have been preserved for us but for one man. William Greenwood Walker, the aged secretary of the Westminster Chess Club, was little of a chess player but a fanatical fan of McDonnell's, and throughout the old gentleman sat beside McDonnell with spectacles on nose, eagerly taking down the moves, and scarce daring to breathe lest the conceptions of his hero should miscarry. So this Mr. Walker isn't the same as the George Walker of the Westminster Chess Club that we mentioned earlier. This is the secretary, a different man. The circumstances, as distinct from the conditions under which the matches were played, strongly favoured McDonnell. He was a very comfortably off bachelor who held the post of Secretary of the West India Committee of Merchants with a salary of £1,200 a year. As his duties were to watch the progress of bills affecting the West Indies, he had work to do only when the Houses of Parliament were sitting. In fact, the Palace of Westminster was burnt down in the famous 1834 fire, which must have occurred during the match. Bourdonnais, however, had come down to £60 a year as secretary of the Paris Chess Club and what he could make as a professional at the Café de la Régente. The Frenchman was renowned for the rapidity of his play, often replying to his opponent's moves within seconds, whereas the Irishman sometimes took as many as 2 hours to make a single move. Indeed, according to George Walker, McDonnell was the slowest player his country had ever produced. "I've seen him an hour and a half," he writes, "and even more over a single move, and I once timed Bourdonnais 55 minutes. But in those spacious days this seems to have impressed rather than repelled the spectators who, even if themselves not sufficiently advanced to appreciate the quality of the play, felt that this was indeed chess, far superior to such weasel encounters of the past as that in 1821 between Lewis and de Chapelle, who played their 3 games match before dinner." The characters of the two men were also very different. Bourdonnais was an ebullient and garrulous individual. When winning, he grew talkative and affable, but when things went against him, he swore tolerably round oaths in a pretty audible voice, as Walker recorded. McDonnell, on the other hand, was observed to be taciturn and imperturbable. Winning or losing, he betrayed little emotion at the table, a habit which seemingly unnerved his explosive opponent. After each game, McDonnell would return to his room exhausted, where he would spend hours pacing back and forth in a state of nervous agitation. Meanwhile, Bourdonnais would be downstairs regaling himself at the chessboard. He would continue to play long after midnight, smoking cigars, drinking punch and gambling. One night he reportedly played 40 games before going to bed, even though he had to face McDonnell the following morning. So that concludes our introduction to the matches. And just one more thing to say. I didn't think it was fair to use my artistic impression to improve our conception of McDonnell, so I've gone ahead and done the same thing for Bourdonnais. So here we go. That's very nice. And so now our 2 players are complete. And we will be ready in the next chess mess to see how they get on in their first match, annotated by Morphy. See you then.